I'm not sure when I became the person who reads. I wasn't always like this. Maybe since my youth I enjoyed, comic books or illustration books, but there was also a version of me that consumed the same content that everyone else consumes, and at a much higher rate than other people would, as a matter of fact. Things like the videos on YouTube, the Netflix shows, or the podcasts, or the endless doom scrolling of other people's condensed thoughts packaged into something digestible in 90 seconds at most. And it's not as if I was a stupid person when I was consuming all that. Instead, I was just shallow in a sense that I was unable to fully see it. I was taking in so much information. I actually read a fact online recently where it's about, I think it was 2021 or something, people consumed on average about 84 gigabytes worth of data every single day. And that would have blown someone's mind back in the 1900s or when the first smartphone first came out. And the issue with that is that you develop very little thought about that information that you intake. You really just scroll, you see it, and then you move on without actually thinking about it. Then I started to pick up books yet again. As a child, I did like to read quite a lot. I was in a bookstore while my mum was looking at something. I would finish a whole book by the time we were finished, so I didn't even need to buy it. I would just read the books. But now I've got to the point where I started properly reading. It's the kind of reading that it's similar to when you sit with something difficult for long enough that it changes the shape of how you think and the way your life ebbs and flows. And something in me shifted in a way that I haven't been able to reverse yet ever since I started genuinely consuming books. And that is what I want for you. That is why I'm making this video. Now the very first thing that starting to read or genuine reading does, and this is very not upfront, no one tells you this cost at the beginning of when you first start reading, is that you slow down in a way that feels uncomfortable in a sense. You feel as if the pace of the book is not the pace of the internet or the pace that is valuable for your time. A book asks you to stay with one singular idea for more than just 8 seconds. It asks you to follow an argument from multiple different perspectives across so many different pages and chapters, and to sit inside of a character's interior for chapters upon chapters before anything actually starts to happen. It feels strange, and if you haven't done something like that in such a long time, then the few sessions at the first, the upfront sessions feel almost physically frustrating because you feel as if you're getting nowhere. However, I'm here to tell you that you must push through that point. That friction is the point that is, being made by reading. The discomfort of it, the discomfort of slowly reading and slowly consuming your knowledge and sitting with what you actually read, is the same discomfort of thinking at full depth. And most people have not thought at full depth or even close to it in so many years because the tools available for consuming information don't allow you to think of that. They don't allow you, and they've made depth a completely optional thing when you consume on the internet. Now, I'm going to tell you about some books that have not left me ever since I read them, because I think it's great to have some sort of list to start with. Now, I don't recommend this one for any first-time readers because it's quite long and it's a little bit technical, but it is The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. In my opinion, it is the longest, most demanding novel and the densest novel in a sense that I've read and encountered, and I would recommend it to anyone with some sort of qualification. Obviously, you don't need it if you feel as if you are intellectual enough to tackle some sort of old classic. I just think it's too long and it flows a bit too much, and Dostoevsky does talk a lot for someone to read it as their first ever book. Again, it's not an easy book because, it contains chapters like The Grand Inquisitor, which was, in my opinion, a single chapter which was one of the most devastating things ever written about human freedom or autonomy and faith, and the terrifying possibility that people don't actually want to live freely. I think it contains such genuine pieces of wisdom that you're unable to not read it throughout your lifetime. And in my opinion, when you read it, you will feel like someone's just reached into your chest or soul and rearranged something completely about the way you see life as a whole. Then recently I read The Stranger by Albert Camus, which in a sense was the opposite of Dostoevsky in almost every single way. That entire book was short and it was spare and it was completely cold, and yet somehow it still clicked in my mind. There was no resolute ending in that book. It really, I think it's a genuine, really great book to read, but I don't think it's for everyone because it's so unapologetically short in a sense that it doesn't require an explanation, but the explanation is invented in your mind. The character Merceau, he moves through the world at a distance from his own life, feeling as if he's a stranger in his own body. He feels, in a sense, almost nothing, and until he's forced to account for it, he genuinely is so distanced from his own life that there is no necessity for him to come back and start living. Now, the book itself is about what actually happens when you strip away or remove the social performance of feeling and look at what is actually underneath all of that. And it takes about 3 hours at most to read. I read it in under a week because I like to space out my reading. However, I think that book will stay with you for years upon years upon years and genuinely will impact you the day you start reading it. One of the first classics I read, which was No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai, is I think a bit harder for me to recommend, which is funny because it's one of the first classics I read when I was like 15 or 16 years old. I just saw it online and I decided to read it. But I think it's genuinely difficult as a book to sit with, which is why I wouldn't recommend it as a first novel or a first classic. The entire point is this man who has spent his entire life performing normalcy because he never actually figured out or fundamentally could not understand other people and is terrified that they will find out that fact about him. If you've ever felt like you were running a simulation of a functional person instead of actually living a life of a real person and being one, then I think this book will make you feel less alone and less alienated in a way that is equal parts comforting and then in another sense devastating. I also recently read On the Shortness of Life by Seneca, and I've talked about it in many of my videos and I've talked about it elsewhere, but I think it belongs here at the end of this list of my books that I've read. Because it's not a very long book, nor is it very technically demanding. I mean, of course, there's parts where he talks about the emperors and the rulers of the times, which I have no fucking idea about, but I love to research about it. But I think the whole point is that it's a direct and a slightly contemptuous argument that you are wasting your life, and, here's exactly how you can fix it and how, or instead, what to do. And I think you should read this book either first or just read it whenever it feels right, whenever it feels like you have no time. I think especially then, the passages and the wisdom will apply to your life at most, so maybe it's a book worth savoring for them. Now beyond those, I think there's a few more which are worth your hours, which I've read half of this, but it's Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And it's not the productivity quotes that you see people quoting on Instagram, but it's the genuine text by Aurelius, which was a Roman emperor writing private notes to himself about how to be a better person and how to never let yourself go. Of course, he never actually intended for anyone to read them, but somehow that makes it even more mystical and wise. And I think it is probably one of the most honest documents in Stoic philosophy. Now, I'm not going to say it's an easy read. As a matter of fact, I stopped reading it because it was really, really complicated for me to read. I'm just not classical like that in a sense, but I think it is a great book for people to pick up and put down and then pick up and put down because it doesn't flow in a sense like a regular book would. Next is a book that's been on my list for quite a while, but I'm yet to read it because I'm lazy, but it is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky again. Now, the book is about a man who commits a murder based off a philosophical idea and then has to live inside the consequences of being the person who did that. The whole point of the book is that it's about guilt and redemption and the specific horror of a self that is unable to escape its own awareness. Again, another one that's been on my list for a long time is A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, he was a psychiatrist who survived Auschwitz, which is honestly incredible, and he wrote about what kept those people alive in those moments. Not the sort of physical strength or luck that you may see in modern media, but instead the presence or instead the absence of meaning. A short book, yes, but it was completely devastating, and instead I think it's one of the most important books written in the entire 20th century. Then there comes The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus. I think I read this one, but seeing what other people say about it online, I might have just downloaded the wrong book because it really doesn't seem like the same book that I've read. This entire book, maybe I do need to reread it. I'm so confused. This is a pretty difficult book to read again. Camus, a lot of his older works, they feel very over-explained in a sense, and then somehow he produces a book like The Stranger where everything is under-explained. I don't know, I'm just yapping now, but this book is more of a philosophical essay rather than a fictional book, and it's the one that opens the question of why suicide or why not to suicide, and instead he spends the rest of his time answering that entire question. Camus' main idea or main philosophy of absurdism is that if life has no meaning, then either you create your own meaning and you rebel in the absurd sense, and you live life on your own terms knowing that the universe isn't going to gift you anything, or you just kill yourself. And why not to kill yourself? If you want to genuinely understand the concept of absurdism properly, well, I do have a video on it, but it's not as good as obviously his own book. I think you should read this book. Now, the reason this title is framed in a way that I'm begging you to start reading instead of just suggesting you books that, oh, maybe I'll read it when I feel like it, is that the books that I just listed contain more genuine thought about how to live and how to start living than almost anything available on any mainstream media platform nowadays. And these books were written by people who sat alone for years upon years, wrestling with the hardest questions that were available to them, and then they produced something that has survived so long, long enough in a sense that it has reached you today. That cannot be an accident or a coincidence. That is the very result of a quality of thinking that short form content structurally is unable to produce. You have a phone, you have a screen on you at all times. You have access to every single piece of content ever made, every single book, every single media, every single translation. And somewhere, probably on some shelf in your room or some shelf in your house which you don't even know about, probably unread in a sense, probably with some sort of bookmark left in it from 6 months ago, you have a physical book, you have a hard copy that you are able to just pick up and read anywhere you go. So I urge you, I beg you to pick that book up tonight and not tomorrow. Don't delegate it yet again. Don't delegate it to when you have more time. Simply tonight, before you go to sleep, just read 5 pages at most. Start with any of these books that I mentioned. You don't need to even. Just figure out what book is made for you and just start reading it. It doesn't matter. Just start. That's the whole point. Just start reading. Anytime you're on the train, instead of going on your phone, read a book. Anytime you're commuting to work, read a book. Anytime you're, sitting alone eating dinner, read a book. Get off your phone just for 5 minutes. That's all I ask of you.